Canada's rich history began with the Indigenous peoples, or the original inhabitants of the land. They live in the area south of the Arctic and are known collectively as the First Nations. It's clear how diverse the First Nations peoples are by the number of Indigenous languages that are spoken across Canada. There are 11 major linguistic families and over 50 languages spoken. Their cultures were and continue to be shaped by the climate and the land. The First Nations can be divided into 5 cultural areas: Northwest Coast, Plateau, Subarctic, Great Plains, and the Northeastern Woodlands. For groups in the Northwest Coast area, the oceans and rivers provided fish, crab, and sea lion, and the forest provided berries, plants, and game, such as deer and black bears. Around the Great Lakes in the Northeastern Woodlands, the climate and soil provided the right conditions to grow crops, such as corn, beans, and squash. In this area, people lived in semi-permanent shelters called longhouses, made from saplings and tree bark, which could house an extended family of up to 30 people. The Great Plains First Nations were nomadic. They moved from place to place, following the migration patterns of the buffalo, their main source of food. They lived in teepees, made using poles and covered with buffalo hides, which were easy to assemble and take down. In the subarctic area, where game was sparse, the Indigenous peoples followed the caribou as they migrated across the land. All First Nations peoples hold a deep respect for nature. For example, each year, the Plateau First Nations honor the first of the salmon to return to the rivers with a special ceremony. Although many live a modern lifestyle today, their traditions continue, and their heritage is present throughout much of the Canadian culture. In 2010, the First Nations peoples took part in hosting the Winter Olympic Games in Vancouver, British Columbia, and led the opening ceremony with traditional dances. As well as music and dance, many continue to practice their traditional arts and crafts. This is just one way for First Nations peoples to keep their culture alive. The first peoples of North America are known as the Aboriginal peoples. Trade between Aboriginal peoples from different areas was a common practice. When the Europeans arrived in North America, they began trading with First Nations groups. They were especially interested in the buying and selling of furs. From the early days until the 20th century, the fur trade in North America was instrumental in shaping the economic development of Canada. Some European traders, who became known as coureurs de bois, chose to live and trade directly with the Aboriginal peoples. They sometimes adopted an Aboriginal way of life and married Aboriginal women. Their children became known as Metis, people with both First Nation and European ancestry. As a result, they formed a unique culture and nation. They developed their own language, Metis, which was a mix of European and Aboriginal languages. The men became skilled in hunting buffalo, trapping small animals, and had excellent knowledge of the land. They were easily recognized by their dress: a blue cape, beaded pipe bag, and a bright red sash. Many also served as interpreters for the European trading companies and those First Nation groups who were involved in the fur trade. Métis communities grew over time, especially around the Red River area in what is now Manitoba, where fur trading posts had been established. In 1869, negotiations were taking place for their territory to join Confederation. Under the leadership of Louis Riel and others, they formed a provisional government to make sure their needs were heard. Unfortunately, the Métis people felt that they were not sufficiently consulted about the effect these changes would have on their communities. They struggled to keep control over their land, but in the end, many Métis people lost their land and chose to resettle further west in Saskatchewan and Alberta, where other Métis communities were already established. In the late 1930s, Metis settlements were set up by the Alberta government, the first and only legislated land base for the Métis in Canada. Today, the Métis flag, which was first flown in the struggle to keep their lands in the Red River area, is still a symbol of their nationhood. And the bright red Métis sash, worn by men and women, continues to be a symbol for the Métis nation. The Arctic, cold, harsh, and covered with ice. It's hard to imagine people living here, but the Inuit have adapted to this region over thousands of years. The Inuit, which means the people in the Inuit language, are the indigenous peoples who live all over this area. The Arctic covers the northern regions of Canada, Alaska, and Greenland. In Canada, the Inuit speak dialects of the same language, which is Inuktitut. Since it's difficult to grow plants in the Arctic, they became reliant on hunting large sea mammals, such as narwhal, seals, whales, and walrus. They were the first to develop the kayak, ideal for hunting sea mammals because it allowed the hunter to move easily through the water. Seals have been important to the survival of the Inuit. When a seal is hunted, nothing goes to waste. The seal's meat provides food, and oil from the seal's blubber supply heat and light for their homes. The women chew on sealskin to soften the leather. Then, they use the skin to waterproof their clothing. Many of the Inuit are nomadic. They move around the Arctic according to the seasons. During the summer and fall, some Inuit move to coastal areas to fish. Others follow caribou herds in search of food, also for fur for winter clothing and blankets. Their traditional homes reflect their nomadic lifestyle. In the summer, they live in topeks, or tents made from animal skins. They are easy to take down and put up while on hunting expeditions. Some winter homes are semi-permanent shelters, made of stone and wood and covered with moss and snow. Snow houses, or igloos, are small temporary shelters used when traveling. While many continue to follow this traditional way of life, most have chosen to move into modern homes in small villages and towns. Dog sled teams are still used as a means of transport. But the Inuit are also using snowmobiles and similar vehicles to get around the ice. Hunting and fishing continue to be an important part of their culture. Today, many use motorized boats and modern equipment to fish. The Inuit work hard to carry on their customs. In 1999, a new territory was established in Canada to give them control over their land. They named it Nunavut, which means our land, and it is governed by the Inuit. In this way, they can decide how to preserve their way of life in the Arctic.